Good day, everyone. I'm your host and presenter today, Mike Lasecki. Our topic is creating dashboards for grants development and management in today's webinar, May 18th, 2017. Thanks for joining today. Let's look a little bit about the system that we're using. The webinar details, you'll be in listen-only mode using your computer or phone for your audio systems, and please use that question window on the lower right of your screen. Yes, the webinar is being recorded. You automatically get a link to the recording. Thanks for joining today. Brought to you by the Centers Collaborative for Technical Assistance, with additional support from the ATE Collaborative Impact Project and funding from the National Science Foundation. Thank you to those who support this project. What is this CCTA thing? Well, it's led by 5 centers. The first one, as you see, is the National Center for Convergence Technology, the South Carolina AT Center, the Florida ATE Center, BioLink, and our own Networks Resource Center here at the Maricopa Community Colleges. Thank you, centers, for being part of this. What's the purpose of this CCTA? Well, it was designed to provide technical assistance to grantees, both from the labor side and the NSF side. But more than that, we invite participation from all of those that are interested in these topics, workforce-oriented programs in general. So thank you for joining. Our deliverables are webinars like this one, identification of best practices, which you can see as white papers on the website, and we host convenings like the one at HITECH coming up this summer that you'll hear more about. Now it's time for me to ask you a question. In a moment, we're going to launch the first poll. I'm going to ask you if you could identify your affiliation. So there's the poll on your screen. Would you please click on the radial buttons? You'll indicate that you're involved with NSF, with labor, with both, or neither. Well, yes, I see all kinds of results streaming in. You probably know the answer to this one. I'll give you just another moment. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Please type in those last answers. Let's take a look. I'm going to close the poll and then display the results. And let's look at our results today. Pretty impressive. We have people from all over, but the largest, almost the largest number, have both NSF and TAC grants. Isn't that interesting? So there's a spectrum that you see of people that are involved today. Good. Let's close that poll, and I have one more question for you. Just a moment. Oops, sorry. We like to ask this question: how many people are in the room with you? So let me choose this poll. Display the poll for you. There it is. This helps us look at the broadening of our impact. Often we will sit in the room together, watch this webinar at lunchtime. So thank you very much for just typing that in. We use this to demonstrate our impact to the NSF. I'm going to close it. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Closing the poll. Let's take a look at the results. Well, of course, most of us are by ourselves. That's sort of the nature of things. But 10, 5, 19% have more than one person with them in the room. Thanks very much for doing that. Let's close that poll and move on. There he is, about the presenter. That's me on the right-hand side. I'm Mike Lasecki. A little bit about me. I'm a PI of an NSF grant. I've reviewed for NIH and NSF grants. I've got a technical background in chemical physics and lasers, but I like to think about evaluation and impact as well. So thanks very much for joining. And now it's my pleasure to welcome my co-presenter, Laura Smith. She's the Coordinator of Grants Development and Management at Gateway Community College. Hi, Laura. Would you say hi to everybody?
Hello, everybody. Hope you enjoyed the webinar today.
Good. Your audio sounds just great. Gateway has been very successful in grants over the years, and I think a lot of that has to do with you. We're actually going to look at some dashboard data later on in the program. So thank you, Laura, for joining us today.
Thank you, and thanks for the compliment.
Okay, so let's go ahead. What's the context for today's thing? Well, even though we're focused on grant developers and resource development personnel, it applies across a large spectrum. And do you know that those sort of people like Laura, they're managers today, and they get questions about evaluation, outcomes, evaluators, evidence, data management. It's more than just writing grants. It has to do with all of these things. In fact, I went online and found a job description for a grant coordinator. You can see the link to the community college there. And what do they have to do? They have to develop, implement, monitor, and evaluate a grant management and reporting system. This was one of the job duties for a grant coordinator. That's a lot of work in addition to developing grants themselves. So we're going to hopefully give some help there. Here's some more background and context. I was at a recent meeting talking about the major changes in federal grants management upcoming in here now in 2017. So it was me that highlighted number 1 and 2. There's a focus on outcomes. Number 2, performance metrics. Man, are they talking our language? Sure, there's other things like micro purchases. Who cares about those things? No, I'm joking about that. Our focus today is on number 1 and number 2. If you want to learn more about this, you can see the source there, Brewman.com, and that's the legal firm that provides advice to a number of people in the United States about federal funding opportunities. So your knowledge and skill is increasingly called upon in the grant management area, whether we're resource developers or PIs or project staff. And I think the bullet number 2, if you set up a viable process for your project, whatever it is, to begin tracking that success, it's going to make a difference for you in many different ways, which we'll discuss today. Again, our point of view, the development office, sponsored research officers, their teams, and anyone working on a project of any sort can gain from knowledge about dashboards. I know I'm going fast through this stuff, but I want to get to the meat of the dashboard things. And by the way, you can always review this on a recording too. Here's what we're doing today. Number 1, we're going to define dashboard elements. Number 2, distinguish informational elements from the important KPIs, the key performance indicators. Look at the 3rd bullet. We want to create ownership because that dashboard, if it's owned, is going to give it a dynamism or a dynamic reporting tool. And towards the end, we'll show you how you can develop your own dashboard with simple examples. And this is the key thing, we're going to get excited about publishing our dashboard on the web as a live interactive tool. Let's talk about the first thing, those dashboard elements. I think of them in 3 ways. A dashboard ought to have data and trends, metrics and measures, and those important KPIs. So as you think about a dashboard, it's got those 3 elements. Let's get a sense of what a dashboard looks like. So I'm nosing around the web and I find Seattle College's data dashboard. So it wouldn't surprise you that a college would have student profiles, enrollment, e-learning, diversity, student achievement metrics. This is the headline of their dashboard and of course a link to see it. Now if you looked a little bit further at their student profile, it wouldn't surprise you to see data like this. Notice how they're using a very visual display of their fall student count, their full-time student percentages, their financial aid. All of this stuff comes streaming out of the institutional research departments, and it's used to give information. These are information and data elements, pretty typical of a dashboard. You can go right to the Seattle's homepage and see this stuff yourself. Now let's look at something that's more about performance. It's that same thing we looked at a moment ago, but now I'm talking about completions. What does that mean? Well, if we look further into Seattle's dashboard, under completions, you see how it's highlighted there in the upper right? They're measuring their colleges. It's a group of 3 colleges, Central, North, and South. The gray bar shows the state norms. And notice on the first one at 40% or 44, they're actually doing a bit better than the state norms. Look how they're using the data visual display to show their progress against a benchmark. These are important performance indicators for Seattle. Turn your eyes towards the bottom. Transfers who earned a degree, professional technical completions. So you can really get some important information at a glance. You're looking at performance and data. That's the advantage of dashboards. For many of you, I'm not telling you something new. I'm just reinforcing the value here. Back to the dashboard elements. Remember, there's 3 of them. Data and trends, Metrics and measures, and what's the third one? Yes, everyone shouts out key performance indicators. So as you look at this further, let's look at some examples of data and trends. These aren't necessarily going to be the ones you use. I just want to use them as illustrative elements. So data and trends could be what sort of awards are being made by the colleges, awards being certificates of completion or degree completion. What's the trends in occupational programs over time? What do those trends look like? So that could be typical sort of things that we're looking at. Now notice I've underlined the words at the top of the frame. You're creating an outline. I want to put in your mind as you think about a dashboard, it'd be like writing a term paper, right? You start with an outline of the key things that you want to have and what your subsections are going to be. Your three things are data and trends, metrics and measures, and KPIs. So I'm just trying to reinforce that. So now occupational programs. I'm now going to actually start creating my dashboard. I'm going to create a link between the other part of my Excel spreadsheet, which has information about occupational programs. I'm in Excel. All of us use Excel to some level. I'm not very good, I have to tell you the truth, or else you can find somebody that can help you. But look at the dashboard trends on the right. There's trends, data elements, right? Number 3, occupational programs, years and award, and I've got it linked to a sheet at the bottom of the page. All of us are pretty familiar with, these worksheets and stuff in Excel. I don't want to go through this in detail as if I'm giving you a tutorial in Excel, but there will be a little bit of detail here. So now I've got my dashboard information set up. I want to show it to somebody. Excel has this little thing of linking to it, of linking the worksheet in here. So I click on that data. Here it is, occupational elements. There it's all presented, ready to go. And now we're ready to review the dashboard. I'm now going quickly through this, so I'm trying to give you a sense that it's pretty easy manipulation in Excel. So what do? We set up data and trends. We used Excel. We outlined our dashboard. We used the sheet for every dashboard element. Each of those elements has its own little sheet. And now the key thing is we linked from our dashboard right to that sheet. I'm not going to I'm going to talk about this a lot, but you can use the edit hyperlink command. Pretty easy to figure out, even I can do it. We anchor it, and that's the final step in creating your dashboard. Notice I'm going through creating a dashboard in a matter of minutes here, so it's not a tough thing to do. It's a few little details, but you can do it. Your dashboard's ready to go. You've got it set up, you've outlined it, you've created your worksheets, you've linked them, ready to show. So your boss comes in and say, hey, let me show you this dashboard. Open up your Excel and click on it. Click on that occupational program activity trend. Click, there it is. So that's the results of clicking on the trend. You can see the academic years, the number of programs going on to moratorium, whatever you've got to show. So in just a matter of a few minutes, we work quickly here, but we've come pretty fast to actually getting towards what dashboards mean and how to think about them. Now, Laura, let me turn toward you. You're a grants development officer. What are the sort of things that you track, data, trends? What do you do in your grants office?
Well, I thought the webinar was over because you already showed us how to use a dashboard. So I thought we were done and we could...
we could go away. We could head off to lunch. Oh, no, it's past lunch. Yeah, okay. Yeah. So what do you do over there at Gateway? Yeah.
Well, I think that there's interesting information that we should keep track of when we're looking at different types of opportunities. For community colleges in particular, there's opportunities where community colleges are eligible to apply, but if you dig a little deeper, you see that they are awarding to four-year colleges and universities as opposed to community colleges. So that's something that I'd like to know going into a grant opportunity is, does this funder really fund community colleges, and what percentage of awards go to community colleges instead of universities? So that's something that is easy for us to see. If we put it in a dashboard, we can help to identify the types of agencies that are truly interested and actively funding community colleges over universities, which increases our likelihood of being funded. Another thing, go ahead.
I guess those trends change over time, so you probably measure that over time too, huh?
Yes. I would say another thing that changes over time is what particular interests are of funders. You know, a few years ago, STEM was the big push, as it still is, but then we heard arts being introduced into STEM, and then STEAM was the buzzword. Now there's still a large focus on IT and cybersecurity. So I think gauging the interest of the funders and the ways those trend is important as well. So if we can also check by agency to see, you know, what are their top interests.
Sure, that makes sense.
Then we know what agency to go to for what type of program. Another thing that's fairly new over the last couple of years in the grants world is competitive preference priorities. And those are kind of like the extra credit points you can get in a proposal. More agencies are adopting those, and if we look at them closely, we can see trends in what their interests are for us to address those points. One of the things we see more in grant development is evidence of effectiveness or evidence-based strategies. And so that's something else that we might want to keep an eye on to see what type of agencies are focused on those different types of competitive preference priorities.
Sure, makes sense.
Yeah.
That's cool. Those are good examples, I think, of trends of somebody like you in your position would track. And for example, for me, you know, I'm in this advanced manufacturing thing. We'll look at trends and, like, for example, in automation, how that's changing the way things are done. We might use that information as we go into a proposal development and use that in our needs section. So it's actually a good idea to put that stuff on our dashboard because it's right there. We're ready to grab it. So
yes, labor market needs are very important, and
yeah,
that's
cool.
something that is definitely going to change over time. Mm-hmm.
Cool. I think the point, Laura, is that you can use this section of the dashboard to put what's relevant to you. It's like a resource that's right there at your disposal. You know what? I'm going to go ahead into our presentation and talk a bit more about dashboards. Oops, excuse me, I went too fast. So we just finished talking about data and trends, folks. Let's think about metrics and measures. What does that mean? What do we mean when we say that? What does that mean for a dashboard? Well, I've sort of bolded some examples of metrics and measurements here. Google Analytics, that's a simple one. Information requests. These are two simple things. Let's see how they would play out. Well, analytics could be a measure. You know, analytics aren't hard to get. They could give you a sense of the interest, in particular the change in interest of your web elements over time, give you a sense if you're getting new people coming in versus other people who are referring to you, all that sort of stuff. Analytics would be considered a measure. Here I've simply grabbed a screenshot from my analytics dashboard and I've pasted that into my Excel sheet. So now it becomes part of my dashboard. What about information requests? Well, I took this information, actually working with colleagues here at the Maricopa Community Colleges, and if you look at the questions they get, the requests, turn your eye to the left-hand side. Occupational data, industry data, college-related data like programs, and other things. They track this, and you can see their numbers and their percents. And the title of this graph is Response to Colleges and Stakeholders' Requests for Information. So at a glance, using a pie chart like this, a digital display, I have a good friend who doesn't like pie charts. I won't mention her name, but anyhow, it's not you, Laura, it's somebody else. But I think there can be reasons that you use pie charts. This one tells you immediately the mix of requests and the volume of requests. Notice it's not just the percents, but the N as well to show you volumes. So this is the sort of metrics and measures that you might want to include. A grants office often will get requests for information. You might consider tracking something like that. Or you could use this as a metric. Here's one you get by yourself by conducting your own survey. So let's send out a survey to everybody in our districts or your districts, and it says, would you recommend the Office of Sponsored Research, whatever you call your grants office? Sometimes it's Office of Sponsored Programs, sometimes it's simply the grants office. Would you recommend their resources and services to others? So we sent this out and we got 57 strongly recommended, 32 recommend, 7 neutral, and 4 won't. We ignore those. No, I'm just kidding. We do look at these ratios. This is the recommender score. So we can track these things over time and get an idea of responsiveness. So think about that. Not only are you getting data from other people, but you can generate your own data through your surveys. That was my big point there. Laura, do you do that? You must get a zillion requests for assistance. Do you track stuff like that?
We do. I think another data point that is maybe more valuable is, and another poll question to ask is, how intimidated are you by the grant process, or how interested are you, how comfortable do you feel in applying for proposals? Because that's one thing we come up against, is that faculty, administrators, staff, they would love proposal dollars, they would love grant funding, but they often think that the process is too daunting and that they're in it alone and that it's going to increase their workload. And so I think it would be good to ask them, you know, how open they are to it or how interested. And then on the other side of that, track, you know, we try to increase the amount of proposals we submit, the amount of dollars that we get, but also participation among individual faculty, staff, divisions, or programs. So that's something that I would look at.
That's good. If you track that stuff, then that can show sort of, I don't just mean your activities, but show your responsiveness, right? I mean, that's one of your tasks. It must be responding to people that you work with. So that's an important thing.
Yes, and also in growing and enhancing and improving the culture of grants across the college. So by getting more people interested and involved, I think shows success for the grants office.
I think that's an important thing. We work with, as you do, with faculty who are new to grants, and at first they think, gee, I should write a grant to do this. And I think encouraging them, but showing them the depth of the effort needed to do that, I think that's a viable thing that grants offices do. They're always bringing new people in to that process, keeping it live, you know what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah, cool. All right, good. Let me turn after that discussion. Let's see what questions we have from the audience. We talk about, this is Mr. Thoughtful. We refer to this guy as Mr. Thoughtful. So he's thinking about questions. I have one that came in by email. Do you have anything there from your side?
I do not yet. Looks like
good.
people may be typing them in.
Okay, good, thanks. So please, folks, use the question window, type in questions that you have. I have a question that has to do, that came in by email. It says, can you use data from your institutional research department? How responsive are they? Laura, when you ask your institutional research department for data requests, do you get a response, or do they tell you to go in line and they'll get to it when they can? I mean, how does it work?
Well, I am very fortunate. My grants department and the institutional research department both report to the director of institutional effectiveness. So while we're a little bit different, we have the same reporting structure, and so they are very responsive to my needs. But they also, it's interesting, they also use dashboards to publish college data and keep that available on our internal website so that people can go there and get information as they need it. However, for special requests, they are very responsive.
Interesting. Thank you. There's another email question that I'll bring forward. It says, are there specific softwares that are used for dashboard? You mentioned Excel, but are there other things? The answer is yes, and I intend to talk about those as we go into the second part of the thing. So that's a good question. I want to give you the sense that dashboards are not something to be intimidated by, or you figure that you got to contract with somebody or hire a software person or get some fancy license. You can do them in very thoughtful ways. The hard part isn't creating the dashboard itself, is it, Laura? It's thinking about what the elements are and how they're interconnected. I think that's the hard part.
That's true, and also we need to remember that quantitative data doesn't always tell the story. So if there are several influencers or variables or details behind the percentages that we may show, we want to make sure that people understand that.
Good point. Let me address one more question that's come into the question window. I showed some data there where we had a negative response, that is 4% of the people would not recommend the services. And there was a good question, how do you close the loop on that negative response? It's challenging, Laura, because we make that an anonymous survey. We want people to feel that they can say anything in those surveys. So the best way we can do that is not from that survey itself, but to use other mechanisms. For example, we might set up a phone interview, we'll choose an arbitrary subset of those responders and just do a phone interview and ask them to give some comments. I think that's the best way of teasing that out. I don't think there's anything you can do to directly close that loop on a negative response. I think if you're aware of it, though, you can make sure that you're doing everything you can to address issues that might come up. I know that's sort of a hand-waving answer, Laura, but I don't think there's a really good way, especially since we do this with anonymity. So.
Sure. I would also suggest maybe listing different components of dealing with the grants office or with the grants staff, asking the same group to rate those on a Likert scale, and then adding some open-ended text boxes where they can give specific examples of challenges that they've had. Right. Maybe you'll solicit more info that way, and it can still remain anonymous.
Cool. Good point. You know what, in the interest of time, let's go ahead. There's a few other questions, but let's save them for the next question period as we get to them. All right, next, we're going to switch now to that third element of dashboards called key performance indicators. Remember, there's only three. There's data and trends, metric and measures, and now KPIs. Whereas you've got a lot of flexibility, as the slide says here, with those first two items. You can make them as big or small or as many or as few. KPIs you have to think of as much more limited. They're limited in number and they are ultra specific. So you're going to have a few KPIs and they're going to mean a lot. Now, how do we know when we reach a goal? Laura, I've got an idea for a new product. I want to develop this Nike-like Fitband, and it tells me that I've achieved the goal in my grant project. It lights up. Do you think I could sell these if I could do that?
I think if you added a speaker and a feature that gave you a round of applause when you hit your goal, that might help.
Now we're talking. Okay, folks, this is a joke slide. It didn't actually mean that I'm working with Nike on the Fitband goal monitor. Anyhow, sorry. Oh, time for a poll. As we get into KPIs, I want to ask you a question. I haven't launched the poll yet, so I want you to think a bit here. What do you think is the better of these key performance indicators? Let's say we're in the grants world. Would we measure a funding rate, that's the percent of submitted, or number of competitive proposals submitted? I'm going to put on my thinking cap here. Let's go ahead and launch this poll and see what you think. So there it is, folks. In your opinion now, what's the best KPI? Funding rate or number of competitive proposals submitted? People are thinking.
Oh, no.
People are thinking about these things. Why are you saying, oh no? What's your problem there?
Well, because I'm going to disagree with the majority of the audience. I'm going to assume that the majority of the audience...
They haven't seen the results yet. No, only if you've seen the results. Okay, I'm going to give them a countdown, and then we can talk about this. Okay. I know you've got feelings about this.
I do.
Okay. All right, here we go, folks. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We've made our choices, closing the poll, and now let's take a look at those results. Okay, there, Laura, 56% say funding rate is the better of these two KPIs. What do you think? What's your thinking?
Well, I'm not just going for job security here, but there's so many factors that affect the funding rate. I think I personally, and this is me as being in the grants office, think that the number of competitive proposals submitted is a much better indicator. There's just so many things outside your control when it comes to the funding rate. For example, I had submitted a proposal to a project a couple years ago, and there was 100 points possible. As I mentioned, those competitive preference priorities give you extra credit points. I believe we ended up getting 103.5 points out of 100 plus, I believe, 6 extra credit points, and we still were not funded. So I think that means that we submitted a highly competitive proposal, and we should get credit for that. But the fact that we were not funded just had to do with the amount of proposals that came in, the amount of funds that they had. There was actually a tiebreaker that came down to something silly like the amount spent on our library that is out of our control, and we didn't get funded.
No,
so I would go with the second.
There's no sour grapes there at all, I can tell.
I just don't think it's so black and white.
It's such an interesting discussion. Here I am, the president. Let's suppose I'm the president of Gateway Community College. I would sort of be interested in what our funding rate is. It would give me an idea that we're doing pretty good, but I guess I'd also want to know B as well. I think this is an interesting discussion. Laura, I'm going to ask them one more question. I'm going to close this poll and then got another one. Love doing these polls. So same question, choose the best KPI. Total dollars awarded per year. Number of grant training sessions conducted. This one might be a little bit easier. Let's go ahead and launch this poll. Just a minute here. I figure out which button to press. There we go. Okay, so now the poll's up and it says, what's the best KPI, in your opinion, total dollars awarded per year or the number of grant training sessions conducted? And Laura, I suppose both you and I will be commenting here in a moment.
Sure.
Let's give people a chance to put it in. Sometimes if they're in a group, they'll talk for a moment before they make their decision, or somebody just grabs the mouse and clicks the button. That's what usually happens. Okay. So folks, let's not stress on this too much. Just give them your best thoughts. A bunch of people have responded here, Laura. I'm going to close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Closed. And let's take a look at the results. Well, I'm not too surprised. 64% think the dollars awarded per year is good, but a fairly large number of us, a little more than a third, number of grant training sessions. What's your take on that?
Well, I think money is very important, and I think in this case, even though it's out of your control, or out of my control, I should say, I do agree that the total dollar amount funded per year is the more valuable KPI here. We have a target dollar amount that we go after, and if that means we submit 10 proposals to get it, or we submit 2 proposals to get it, there is an expectation that we're going to hit that dollar amount.
Yeah.
As for the grant training sessions, like as I mentioned before, it's great to increase interest and participation throughout the college in grants and strengthen that culture of grants. But I think that my president would be much happier if I brought in $10 million compared to producing 20 training sessions.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you mentioned that culture, as you just said, of engaging more people in the grants, and you would do that partly. I guess the answer is, of course, both, but I think in this case, I would agree with the majority of the audience that it's, at some levels, you got to look at that. Okay, cool. Fun to talk about these things. I'm going to close that and go on to the next slide, and let's take a look and see where we are now. So again, we're focused on those KPIs, right? Remember, how many more times are you going to say this, Mike? 3 dashboard elements: data and trends, metrics and measures, and then KPIs. That's a dashboard. Let's look at a little bit more at these key performance indicators. Laura, we just talked about these polls. What are your key performance indicators? Do you officially have them?
We do. For the grants office, we definitely do look at the total dollar amount. We have a target, and we look at the number of competitive proposals, as you talked about before, and also the participation. So we're looking for an increase among individual participants in the grants training sessions and grants process. Also, an increase in grants spread across different divisions of the college. And I know we're talking about grants development, but also in grant implementation, there's common key performance indicators that will have to be reported on throughout a grant. And as we're developing a grant, we work with our IR office to identify our baseline and target metrics for that. So related to student success, we often deal with enrollment, persistence, retention, completion, and even though, as I said, that is measured in the grant implementation phase, we have to look at that and gather that baseline data and establish those targets during the grant development phase.
That's an important point. You know, I've got a great comment that came in via our question window, and I totally believe this. It says KPIs should be related to an individual institution's objectives. I totally agree with that, and we're going to reinforce that as we come forward here. I think you mentioned having targets. That's an important point of a key performance indicator, targets as well. We'll try to reinforce that as we go forward. So folks, thanks for those comments. Let's look at two just to illustrate about this thing. We're going to beat the KPIs to death here. I'm just throwing these two down, funding rate, and here's another one to consider, nursing program outcomes. I'm trying to give you multiple examples of KPIs. Let's look at those nursing KPIs. There they are. There's 4 of them. The percent of alumni employed, that sounds like a good one. Number of graduates, that's an important one for a program. The third one, that's the national exam for registered nurses. Boy, look at those pass rates, wow. And the graduation rate. Those are the 4 KPIs for that nursing program here in the district, and I think they're good ones. They're meaningful, they're aligned to the objectives of the program. So as you see, there's not a lot of these things here, and they're specific, and that's the distinction for KPIs. Let's look at another example, and this relates to the comment that came in the chat. I think you would recognize a KPI, Laura, if you could recognize its link to big goals. I think that's one of the keys. All right,
that's good.
Look at that big goal. See what it says? Number of occupational program completers, can't even read my own stuff, passing a licensing exam or earning an industry recognized credential. That's the big goal. We want to increase that number. And those four KPIs, they're going to tell you that, won't they?
Yeah, and there's a comment in the question box that the key performance indicators should be related to an individual institution's objectives. And for us,
there it is,
we connect them to our strategic planning and to our governing board metrics.
Oh yeah, cool. Good point. So to me, remember we've tried to, as we've gone through this distinction between just data and trends, and then metrics and measures, and now KPIs. And again, that distinguisher for us, we're getting this drummed into our head, is to link to the big goals. Here's a comment and a pretty picture. Make your dashboard real and evergreen. So what does that mean? Well, real, I mean it in a funny way, because sometimes you can show people a dashboard and they say, oh yeah, that's fine. But if you assign a dashboard element to them, like a member of your project team or something, they're suddenly owning that data point, and they want to keep it up to date. They want to show you. They want to tell you about it. So I'm going to reinforce this again. And then finally,
if it doesn't look great, they want to find a reason to explain why it's not positive, right?
Yeah. No, I think you're right. Anyhow, in addition to that ownership thing, dashboards are nothing if they don't live, if they're not live in a sense of having some sort of mechanism while you routinely or periodically update their data. So that's sort of an obvious one, but I've been with organizations, we did a dashboard, it sat on the shelf for 18 months before somebody looked at it again. I felt sort of bad, but well, you know. Let's go ahead and talk about this a little bit more. Look at column C, Laura, provided by. I've got initials of people there. If you look at number 19, there's my initials down there. I also got number 14. Anyhow, so as we would go into staff meetings, we would pull up this dashboard on the screen and we'd say, okay, ML, let's talk about number 14. And I would click on it and we would talk about it. It was a good way of developing ownership. It's not a bad thing. Let's take a look now at what a real, not real, I mean a very active community colleges development office at Sinclair Community Colleges. Many of you know Sinclair in Ohio. Here's their annual activity report. So I just went right into it. It's online. And I looked at some of their performance and indicators and things like this. None of this would surprise you. Look at the upper left. Proposals, number funded, pending, not funded, pre-proposals, not too many people do pre-proposals anymore. Reports, oh, that's good. Storyboarding. Laura, do you do storyboarding when you're doing a grant development?
At times, I have before, yes.
Okay. Presentations, so you can see the sort of things they track, but there's their big ones down in the bottom. Total projects funded, total funding, and success rate. Holy cow, 72+%. That's a good number. So you can see what they're tracking, and this came right out of their reporting structure. Just to give you a sense of what others are looking at. What about our colleagues at Hillsborough Community College down in Florida? We have some good friends down there. I went on to page 19 of their grants activity report, and this is what I found. They track the annual grant revenue year over year. There it is, grant revenues. So it's important. They believe in things like this, and they decorate their report with nice images. So that's cool. Just to give you a sense of some of the things that they're looking at. All right, now let's think about a development dashboard. What might it look like? Well, of course, it wouldn't surprise you that it has 3 categories. We all know them now. And we could start with stuff like this. Maybe under data and trends, you mentioned a trend. Laura, we might be able to track trends in private foundations, maybe more focus on community colleges, maybe more focus on STEAM. You mentioned that. Those would be the trends. Metrics, this is an easy one. Number of grants submitted, that might be something we track. And key performance indicators, funding rate. Okay, so that makes sense. We might want to track things like this. We can already start developing our own development dashboards. So now I get to ask you a couple of questions. These are mostly thinking questions. What is dashboardable? I made up that term myself, Laura, dashboardable. Guess it's not too hard. I'd like to ask whether you think the funding rate versus the target, total funding versus target or funding rate, do you think of that as a data, a metric, or a KPI? So we're thinking. I'm going to change the slide and tell you what I think. I think both of these are KPIs, funding dollars versus funding target dollars and funding rate. I'm pretty sure we would all agree those are pretty good key performance indicators. But what if I asked you grant performance, grant monitoring, data metric or KPI? What would you say here? Well, pretty much I think that we would measure in some way grant performance, and if we were monitoring a grant's compliance to, let's say, purchasing, requisition things, we might be able to think that as a metric. I'm just giving you ideas, letting you think about dashboards. What about grants information? Number of grants at risk. I bet you a development office might actually have some of these things. Grants under IRB monitoring. What would we consider these things to be? Yeah, I agree. Measures, metrics, that makes sense. Number of grants at risk, grants under IRB monitoring. See, in your mind, you're thinking, yeah, we could do this. We could measure, we could track things like this. Relationships with grant project managers. Number of grant-seeking activities. I'm feeling less certain here. Laura, I've got a question mark. How in the world would I track relationships with grant project managers? Well, how would I do that? I don't know.
I would ask the value, how much they value that, how much assistance, that provides them, how much support.
Yeah, okay, cool. Again, we're doing this as a thinking exercise, not to make this big. Budget development requests, research requests, well, everybody would agree those are sort of metrics here. Good, throwing some ideas at you. Doing these visuals, I took some data. I made up this data a little bit about grant funding key performance indicators. I didn't really do it because it was data I used for our own organization here within the district. What was the return from our community college district on their investment in us? What was the % of target? We had a good year that year. We got very close to 100% of return. Funding received versus target, we're actually ahead of the curve. quality of proposals based on reviews. We looked at the scores, the excellence, the very goods, and we made a judgment call on quality. We felt we could do better, but we also felt we were doing pretty good with it, so we gave ourselves a 90% score there. This was something we tracked, and we tracked it over time. So that's what we looked at as a visual display for our dashboard. Here's some hard questions. Well, some easy ones too. Number of grants and the funding rate. That's easy. We can do that. Are the grants developed sufficiently aligned to the mission of the college or institution? Notice I said sufficiently aligned. Some judgment calls there. And then you mentioned this, Laura, development of a culture of grant seeking at your institution. I think that's harder to put on a dashboard, but I think there could be some advantages of doing it as well. All right, folks, we're coming into the last and really fun section of this. Could we move this to the web? Here's another Mr. Thinking. He's thinking, I used to look like that when I was younger, Laura. That could have been me. Well, anyhow, let's not go there. Could we move this to the web? The answer is yes. Now, some of you are aware of there's two important platforms out there. I bet you there's more. One is called Microsoft Business Intelligence, and I'm going to read what it says here. Business Intelligence is a cloud service that provides non-technical business users, that's me, with tools for aggregating, I like that, analyzing, even better, visualizing, I like it even more, and sharing data. Holy cow, those four things, I would like that. And many of you know the software Tableau. It's similar in various ways. So your institution could be a Windows place or a Microsoft place, or maybe you use Tableau. So what does it mean? And maybe you've had no exposure yet. I would say over the past 3 years, these things have come on, and they've come on fast, and business have adopted them very strongly. There's a lot of business applications for these things, and educational institutions are now turning to them as viable in the cloud approaches. So how does it work? It's actually relatively straightforward. You establish your data in Excel or a comma delimited file if you like, but get your data in there. Number two, identify the relationships you wish to display. What versus what? What trends are you measuring? See, this is where you earn your salary, right? You understand those relationships. And then on the software, you select, just click on it, the visualization that you like. I'm making this sound a little bit, excuse me, easier than it actually is, but I'll elaborate on that in a moment. So look, I'm selecting my visualizations. This is right out of Microsoft Business Intelligence. I could select those bar charts, the gauge charts on the lower left with the target. Waterfall charts are fun, or maps. Hold on just a second. Thank you, I'm back. So that's the step, and these platforms give you a lot of things. You don't have to create these charts. They do it for you, so that's sort of fun. But of course, that's not the hard part. It's trying to make sure we understand what the things do. Now let's look at a real example. We're going live onto the web. I have colleagues here at my college, and they were very kind to offer me some very preliminary data. They wanted to make sure that everyone knew that this is sample data only, so please don't hold them to anything. We agree. So as we developed this dashboard, they said, let's take a look at grants awarded by funding agency, awarded by strategic initiative. That's a good one, isn't it, Laura? There's that alignment to governing goals. And grants awarded by college. We're multi-college districts, so that would be an important thing for us. I'm actually going to go live now. I'm going to click on this link, and we're going to go to the web, and this better work. There we go. I actually clicked on it. Oh my God, it looks like it's working. I'm looking at my test machine. There it is on the screen. It's popped up for me. I'm actually in the cloud. We're doing this live right now. Turn your eyes to the top screen. Laura, it says total by funding source. Look at that, Department of Education. Well, that's clearly our dominant funding source. Now let me amaze you folks online. I'm going to move my mouse onto that bar, and I'm going to right click it. And it says, this is a little hard for you to say, it says see records, click. There's the data behind all of this. Isn't that amazing? In one click, I'm looking at all the data that's feeding into these bars here. Laura, people are amazed on this online. I can just hear their breath being intaken. Turn your eyes, folks, up to the total amount funded by strategic commitment. The type's a little bit low here, but that big bar at 19.8 million is build a thriving community through access and student success. So we've aligned our grant proposals, our reporting to the strategic initiatives. Boy, I really like this. And now, with a little drum roll, I'm going to turn down to the lower left of the screen. Look at that College Gateway Community College. Laura, thanks to you and your colleagues, good, strong success there in total amount funded by colleges. And as you know, that changes over year to year. You don't always control it. I'm going to do one more thing. As we were talking about this, our colleagues in grants said, hey, could we see the number of proposals that constituted these awards? So yes, we said yes. We always say yes. Page 2. And now look at the data on the right. You can see that there were 13 of those National Science Foundation proposals, 13 to the Department of Ed, 27 on the upper left. So in case you wanted that, you could fiddle with the data here. I'm stunned. We're amazed that you can do this. It takes some time. It took us about an hour to rough this out and about 2.5 person days to actually make this happen. So just to give you a sense of how this works. Let's go back. How do I get back? Where am I here? All right, I hope I do this correctly. Here we go. All right, so I'm not quite there. I'll try again. Okay, I'll try again. Let's see. There, we're back.
There we go.
Okay, thank you, Laura. Sorry for the operator error. We're excited about the ability to do this online, and I know you online are excited as well. Where do you add value as we get towards the end of this program as a person? Where do you add value? Well, I took this quote from Yuri Treisman. Many of you have heard him at some level. Resist the trap to chase grants for the allure of their money value. Avoid negative entrepreneurship. I think all of us would nod our heads here. Maybe dashboards help us as we track those things. And number 2, you can add real value by helping ensure alignment to goals. How do you dashboard that? Well, we saw it in a simple way. We chose the major strategic goals and we created an alignment to them on the dashboard. Cool. The dark side of dashboards. It's important that you use the right data. It's important you avoid the wrong data because once it's up there, this is where your job description comes in, making sure you're looking at the right data, so be careful there. Too much extraneous information. People get carried away and start throwing everything up on the dashboard. Bullet 3 says, if you can't really use a dashboard item, then drop it. And I think that's true. And then keeping it live, keeping it evergreen. And here's another comment, be visual with your presentation. I think all of us would sort of laugh by the fact that people don't read anything anymore. If you must show a table, but at least show a visualization with it. Here's one, right, where we look at just some graphics. So showing visualizations is a good one. Here's something that I learned over time. Make the title of the graph tell the story. Now, I'll pull up from our live thing. I'm not going back live. I'm just pulling this out. So here's the title of this graph. Total funded by funding source. Well, that's sort of humdrum. Here's what I should have said, Laura. U.S. Department of Education is the dominant funding source for this year. Wouldn't that make more sense? There's my analysis right in the title, and I don't have to figure out what's going on. So people, I can see you nodding your heads. Use the title to give your analysis of the data. It's really an important thing. Practical hints. We've already talked about this. Encourage ownership by including dashboard as an agenda item in a staff meeting. Don't do it once a year. Keep it up in front of people.
Keeps people on track.
No, it's really good. And then link to those big goals and objectives, right? That's the important stuff. Another hint. I don't know how many times people have asked us, could you help us? We need to do a presentation and it's got to be done by 5 o'clock. Well, you can use your dashboard when people ask you for information about presentations. You say, yep, here's a dashboard link and you can see the trends. You can use that to supplement your presentation. They are happy.
As I said, our IR department keeps the dashboard live for everyone to go there and use.
It's perfect.
Very helpful.
Yeah, they look like stars when you do that. You say, oh my God, they already knew the answer to my question before I asked it. So that's some advice. Okay, summary now as we think about wrapping up today. What can you do now? Well, this is pretty cool. You can go home tonight at dinner. You can say, you know what? I can tell you the 3 major elements of a dashboard. They're going to laugh. You can also, Laura, distinguish plain old informational elements from those important key performance indicators. You can actually do that. And now you know how to create ownership to make this thing dynamic. And you saw today that, my God, I could use Excel to develop a pretty straightforward dashboard, or I could get excited as Mike is and think about doing it in the cloud with some of those interesting software programs. So that's the key things. As you leave today, you're thinking about what you can do. And here's one of my final messages before we go into the final question period. Own the thing, right? Just don't do it, but own it. Make it part of what you do. I've used it in our projects. Laura, I know you've been involved. You helped create dashboards. I've worked on them together with you. It makes a difference to what you do. So own that thing.
It really does. It keeps you up to date with the project. It helps you think of reasons why you may be extremely successful or maybe falling behind. There's a lot of value in dashboards.
I think that's really true. We have a good friendly grants department that says ask frequently, ask often. Yeah, the NSF always advises that too. And by the way, folks, here's my email, mlesecki. There'll be a test on the spelling of that name, M-L-E-S-E-C-K-I, @gmail.com. So go ahead and write me, and I'd love to talk about dashboards, and I'd be happy to talk about it. As we go into our final question, no, let's think for questions for a moment. Let's take a look at the questions that you might have seen in the question window. Laura, what have we got?
Well, I've been chatting with a participant about how to track grants by strategic initiative. And one of the ways that we do that is we're forced to do that through our fiscal management system that where we upload our grants and load the budget and things like that. We have the option of choosing which area the grant supports. And so that's an easy way to gather that data and to run reports if it becomes part of your regular system.
Good point. Good point. If we look at some of the other questions here, I think it's actually more of a comment, but I think all of us would relate to this one. How do you spend your time? Isn't that somehow related to this? And, you know, that's funny, you spend a lot of time on funded proposals and non-funded proposals, right? Is there some way that you could judge that? I don't know how to do that. It's not the time that matters, and yet time is critical to the effort that you make on these things. That's a tough one.
And that goes back to that goes back to the funding rate. You know, there are proposals when we know we're applying and we're going to be highly competitive just by nature.
Yeah.
And then we may receive direction from the president that says, hey, I want us to go for this. You know, even if we don't get it, we may receive valuable feedback from the reviewers. There may be a number of reasons that we choose to apply for something knowing that we might not get it, and we end up spending just as much or more time on it.
Let's shift to what we'll take as the last question, and it's come in from 3 different of our attendees, so that just gives you a sense of how important this is. How do you define a competitive proposal? We talked about tracking competitive proposals. How would you define it? I've got an idea, but let me ask you first. Sure. What would you think?
Well, I would say in developing it, I would check to make sure it's a viable opportunity for us, see how well aligned we are with it. In the plan of operation, there's often key elements that they're looking for. I would think most about how well we are addressing them. This is in the proposal planning stages. But then after the proposal is reviewed, a lot of times you get feedback from the reviewer and the score. So I would say in that case, really truthfully, I would say you want at least a 90% or higher to be competitive, because I don't think they fund things down into the 80%.
Yeah, you know, I'll give you my sense, and then we'll start to wrap up. On the NSF side, A quality proposal is going to get scores in the excellent and very good range. And a non-quality proposal, or one that doesn't strike the reviewers, is going to get goods or more fairs or something like that. So that's not a very hard metric. But if I'm getting excellence and very goods at some level, I'm doing okay. So for me, that's sort of an internal metric. Well, whatever. Here's the one last comment from an attendee. And it hadn't really occurred to me, but it's important. They're starting to track grant projects worked on that didn't necessarily yield a proposal submission that round. There's value there, right?
Yes.
I totally agree. Yeah.
Yes.
All right, folks, there's some ideas about dashboards. It's easier than you think, but you can spend more time on it than you might think too, but I think the payoff in the end is good. Let's wrap up for today. Laura, our attendees are just amazed of how perfectly on time we are, but join us next time at June 15th. Oh man, prior learning assessments, that is getting such interest at colleges around the country, using prior learning assessments for recruitment and retention. I like that, brought to us by colleagues at the South Carolina Center at Clemson, and by Don McCoy. He's a great speaker. I've heard him at the PI conference. Take a look, check out atecenters.org/CCTA for upcoming webinars, and join us in Salt Lake City at HITECH, where we'll have a workforce convening on Friday, July 21st. You can register here. I guess you can't really click that on your screen, but if you go to HITECH, that website, there'll be a place to register, and it's free, so it's fun to do. Laura, that ends our presentation today. Friends, as you leave, a brief survey, and I really mean brief, will open up in a second browser window. Take a moment, click on that. Tell us how this was nearly the greatest webinar that you've ever been, or whatever you've got to think about it, but give us some feedback, because that helps us make things better. Laura, any final comments for our audience on how to think about dashboards and use them most effectively?
Well, I have a question. If I wanted to know more about the Microsoft Business Intelligence, would I just go and Google that? Because I'd love to post some things live.
You can. I've done that. Or if you like, send me an email at Emlisecki. You put it in the comment window. Did you hit respond to all with that? Did they get it? Or
I will do that.
Yeah, put Emlisecki in one of those and hit respond to all. Emlisecki@gmail.com. Just shoot me an email. We can talk about business intelligence or Tableau or whatever you've got. And sure, use Google. There's some money involved with doing those things, licensing and things like that, but it's quite doable. So that's what I would say. Colleagues, that officially ends our webinar today. Thank you to the CCTA for the support of all of us, to the National Science Foundation, and for all of you for participating today. Join us on June 15th in future CCTA webinars. Laura, thank you again for being part of this.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, turning off our audio, and as you exit, you'll see that survey come up. Bye, everyone.